Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlot Banter. Today I'm joined by a closer approximation of Nathan Drake and Victor Sullivan than Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, but nonetheless, aspersions aside, we're here to review finally the Uncharted film, the first of the sort of Sony PlayStation cinematic universe, the SPCU,
Sure, why not? The
the
Spakoo.
spump, the spump, and the spew. I think that's a good pairing. But if you want to share your thoughts about Uncharted or anything else at all, be sure to join our Discord link as usual, top of the description right down there. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. If you
Mm.
like movies or you like PlayStation, you're gonna find them both here in Backlog Banter.
Oh yeah.
So it's worth your time. But
And
but
this
here's
one, guess what? This is kind of both. This is covering both grounds in one goddamn review.
One fell swoop.
Oh
so
yeah.
That's what Ruben Fleischer delivered to us with 2022's
A fell swoop.
Uncharted. One fell swoop of video games and movies.
Ah, great point.
Because
never been done before.
I feel like we should predicate this a little bit. I've played two and a half Uncharted games.
Yeah.
I assume both of you have finished the series.
Yes.
Yeah. All six for me. All five for him. All two and a half for
Hey,
you.
hey, fuck you! I played the mobile game, so I played six
Oh,
also.
he's burning you up. But I like to throw it to you two fellas who have completed this series for a more adept analysis of the themes of Uncharted.
The interesting thing about this film is that not only do you not need to be an Uncharted fan, the amount of glee that one derives from being an Uncharted fan and seeing this movie is pretty minimal in comparison to the unwanted person who wanders in off the streets and
Right.
has never played an Uncharted game. Well, I come barreling in, ready to dig for Easter eggs, and guess what? There's not really that much there. There's a couple on the nose things. He puts on the straps. It's Victor Sullivan. It's Chloe Fraser. Congratulations. Play the music once, and
Hmm.
that's about it. But I don't think that takes away from this movie, but it just doesn't make it that different if you played the games versus
Mm.
haven't.
So
Uh,
Tucker, what you're saying is I can walk into this movie not knowing what a PlayStation is, and I'll be fine.
Tanner,
I'm
you
sure.
you can do that, and then you can go on the PlayStation Network and buy the the brand new PlayStation hit, the Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Oh,
And actually, the Nathan Drake collection is also on sale, by the way. If you're curious, I just rebought it because my PS5 doesn't have a disc drive. But that's a
Classic.
little anecdote in my life. Okay, here's the deal. I love the Uncharted games. I really love them. I think they're some of my favorite games. I think personally some of the best PlayStation games. Period.
Yeah.
And Tucker, you're making a huge error because you're forgetting about the part where Nolan North just sits on a fucking
Oh.
chair
yeah.
and says, "Hey,
It's like-
I did that set piece because that set piece happened." And that one scene would make no sense if you don't know who Nolan North
That's
is.
true.
And it doesn't even. It's just a pipe dream if you do.
Yeah.
that's
But
a it's a reference to the original Nathan Drake. He played him back in the '90s
Yeah.
in the movies.
here are my thoughts on Uncharted. I think the movie is a lot better than I expected it was going to be. I was pleasantly surprised by it, but I think it is entirely nondescript. I think what's interesting about this movie is that it really has very little new about it because basically every character arc, almost every set piece,
Yeah.
basically every plot beat is either directly or thematically ripped from one of the Uncharted games and kind of thrown together. There's a lot of Uncharted 4 in here, but of course, the major action set piece, one of the two major action set pieces is just ripped directly out of Drake's Deception.
Yeah.
Chloe from Uncharted 2 and 3 is here. I mean, a lot of these dynamics, a lot of these ideas are basically going to not just be familiar, but kind of carbon copied from the games if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
I don't think that makes this a bad movie. It's actually, I think, totally technically competent,
Mhm.
but I think it both is too much in the shadow of the games and also lacks a lot of, I think, the identity of the games that makes them not just an adventure movie. And then this basically just becomes this year's Jungle Cruise, which in my opinion is fun, but kind of forgettable.
Yeah. What I will say is that Ruben Fleischer and the folks over at PlayStation Studios Productions or whatever really got lucky that they made this film based on Uncharted, because otherwise I don't think you would have a whisper or a prayer to be talked about that much.
Sure.
Because
yeah.
it is
Unless it was another Tom Holland vehicle to be an Indiana Jones ripoff, then people
Yeah.
would give it buzz for being a Tom Holland movie. But
Mhm.
you're right that the Uncharted veneer, which as we've stated is relatively shallow. If it is ripping off the games, the Easter eggs and stuff isn't there to like
Mm.
really appeal to the hardcore fans. But you're right in that this movie it's by the numbers. I
Yeah.
think frankly, what made it more interesting to me is to see how they were going to adapt a mishmash of all the stories. You're picking up the thematic importance to Drake from 4, and as you said, the characters from 2 and the set piece from 3. Like, you're throwing in a blender here, and I think what comes out is sort of an interesting approximation retelling of an alternate universe Uncharted story
An
that I am
Uncharted puree.
sure, yeah, exactly. But which I am interested to possibly see continued. There's believe it or not, a post credit scene to tease what's coming next. But I still think it is a good movie. I think what really carries it are the things that are adapted from Uncharted, in terms of the fact that this is a lot more puzzle solving, piecing things together than a lot of straight up adventure movies are. Jungle Cruise has like 1 or 2 scenes where they look at a map, and this one they're picking up postcards, they're looking at books, looking at maps, and of course that's very Uncharted. And I think those are personally the strongest parts of the film, because you get these moments of interaction between Nate, Chloe, and Sully, which I think the fact that they inserted Chloe in there as well as to make it sort of a trio of the 3 of them is my favorite part of this film. I think the dynamic between the 3 of them is clearly the strongest aspect. And I'm very excited to see where they go with this, because I think they've set a good foundation that I enjoyed, but it's not super special.
No, I think that is the real issue with is my issue with this, is that like it's just fine. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I don't think this is a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. It's funny sometimes. It did get a laugh out of me a number of times.
Yeah, quite a
But
few. There's a couple lines in there that like I'm literally in a Papa John's. And we just sat there like, oh god.
And that one, even that one is funny because he says I'm literally in a Papa John's, and also partly funny for a reason that they probably didn't intend, in that it's very blatant product placement for Papa John's.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, even then, other times some jokes fall flat. The characters aren't super interesting, I will say. Like, and obviously, you know, I haven't finished the arc of Nathan Drake in the games, or Victor Sullivan, but is there this is a question for you two lads, is there elements of their two characters that are, you know, that get developed a bit more past what we're presented in the film, or is Nathan Drake just kind of like, I miss my brother and I want to hunt for treasure to like honor his memory and prove that I can, you know, big things from small beginnings, and Latin, whatever the Latin phrase is.
Magnus Parva.
Sigma male, whatever.
Sigma male grind set.
Sic parvus magna.
Okay.
He does not pronounce Latin correctly, by the way. He says Calum when he's reading Kylum, it for the word for heaven in Latin. Fuck you, I studied Latin for 7 years.
Yeah, but good for you. But yeah, I was just gonna say, like Mark Wahlberg. I don't think Mark Wahlberg is that good in this movie.
He's one of the weaker elements. Yeah.
Yeah, he is one of the weaker elements. He's just kind of like running through the motions of saying these lines. Like the lines where he is where he is lying to Nathan Drake, and the lines where he is like being heartfelt and like, oh, this is a real moment. There's no like difference in inflection for him. It's just the same sort of line reading. So yeah, but my question still stands for you guys: is there elements of these characters that were missing from the film?
Well, here's the thing about it. The writers at Naughty Dog are talented.
Oh, okay.
I think the thing that's kind of disappointing about this movie is that it is very surface level.
Yeah.
There really is nothing beyond it, and to an extent, I think Uncharted, the first trilogy, is. 3 adds more nuance as we learn about Drake's backstory. But it's really 4 that develops, particularly Nate as a character, because that's when Sam is introduced.
Yeah.
That's when his dynamic with Elena, who we don't see here, and Victor is kind of recontextualized and complicated. But what we get here is Sully is the old one, but he doesn't really seem that wizened here. I really think that they're both miscast still. I felt Tom Holland, especially in that last act, when he's actually walking and talking like Nate, and he's got the holster on and everything. I think they get him a little bit closer, but I never really felt that either of them were cast right, because so much of those characters is the ethos of them, which is just not captured by either actor here, which is again kind of why I feel like this whole movie it's totally fine, but it misses a lot of what makes those games special.
Yeah.
It really does. And I think part of the reason why it might feel just like generic version of Uncharted, like you can tell that they're going for the dynamic, that you can tell that they're going for the a twist on what we know Nathan Drake as he was younger to be in missing his brother, which we did not see for the first 3 games because frankly, the idea of Sam had probably not come into real fruition yet. But is that I think they're missing what makes the characters unique in the games. These are approximations of these characters, but the fact is that Sully in the games is memorable because he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt, he's chomping on his thing, he's saying goddamn all the time. These are the things that make Victor goddamn Sullivan in the games an iconic character. When it's Mark Wahlberg being a wizened older treasure hunter, but he's just wearing a leather jacket and he doesn't have the mustache and he's in like he's not saying anything particularly funny or clever like Victor does in the games. Okay, it's a Sully, but the fact is that it's not even like this is they didn't do Sully right. They didn't even really try to do Sully from the games, and I think it's an interesting take. I don't know if Mark Wahlberg, not cast, he's one of the weaker parts of the film, as you said, but I don't know if he could even do a Sully game style Sully, but it also applies to Nate, who feels just like a twisted up version of what we know Nate to be from the games, because a lot of what makes him iconic is that he's by himself a lot, and he's in or not a lot, but he's by himself climbing a lot, and he's picking up things that he has a quip about. You can't get that in a movie, which is fine, but he's missing that spark that makes the game version so much different from Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Because they make some sort of little joke about Indiana Jones in this movie, don't they? There's some sort of little reference.
Nate asks Chloe, "When did you want to become Indiana Jones?"
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I think another element of why, because we talked about Mark Wahlberg, but Tom Holland himself, I think part of this is not a super big issue, but part of the reason he doesn't work for me as me buying him as Nathan Drake is the fact that I think I've just been conditioned to see Tom Holland as like perpetually like 18, 19, 20 years old, where this he's supposed to be 25, I guess, which Tom Holland is like 25.
Yeah.
I'd also like to add to that same end, the kid who they get as supposedly 10-year-old Nathan Drake is clearly like 15. So it says 15 years later. I turned to Tucker and I said, is Tom Holland supposed to be like 30 in this? And then a little later, he's like, yeah, my brother left when I was 10 years old. I'm like, that kid was not 10 years old.
That kid actually, I think, is a much closer approximation to young Drake than Tom Holland is to older Drake. So I keep trying.
Yeah.
I have to fiddle with things.
Well, because we've never really seen like a 20-year-old Drake before. We've seen kid Drake, and we've seen 28-year-old Drake or whatever age he is in Uncharted 1.
But don't in Uncharted 4 we break back into the family mansion or something as like teenage
maybe I don't remember
Drake.
Frankly.
But here's my point, right? The problem is that I think part of what makes Drake an interesting character is that he's rugged. Tom Holland's really not rugged here. You know, he's like a city bartender in New York.
Yeah, that's another thing I have an issue with. Is that I was going to ask you guys if that was a thing from the games as well. Where does Sully pick up Nathan from? Because I know he does recruit him in the games, right? Sort of.
I believe that we've never clearly explored how they met.
Oh, okay.
Right?
No, yeah. Because even the earliest game in the timeline, which is Golden Abyss, they already know each other. So,
okay.
There is something in Uncharted 3. There's a flashback. It's been a while since I pieced together the Uncharted story because that's not really the important part. It's the characters, it's the dynamics, there's action set pieces. And the reason I'm not coming down on this movie all the way is because I do think it does capture some of the Uncharted energy in that it puts its effort into character dynamic and action set pieces. Yeah. And those two, I think, are handled decently enough to good. I think there are some really fun moments of character dynamic, which I think mostly, at least in my opinion, come from Chloe. I think she is clearly the best cast out of the three of these people. I think she's the most interesting character in that she's not trustworthy and she doesn't trust them, but she has reasons to do so and has this history with Sully, and she has a genuine dynamic with both of them. But it all comes from her, in my opinion.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know about that personally. I don't really get a big feeling off of Chloe. I mean, I like Chloe because I've played Uncharted.
Yeah.
And then we get, of course, more of her out of Lost Legacy, but we see her in the original trilogy somewhat. I think that they're all fine. I think Chloe works better because Chloe looks like Chloe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, like actually, yeah.
So there's a higher degree of believability for me there. But I think the dynamic is fine. I think that they do quip in okay amount. I think especially in that, I think the movie really starts to hit in that third act. I think that's when it really gets moving with the Uncharted stuff. Because like the character dynamic, it's like how many movies do we watch, especially in the Disney blockbuster era, of main characters who are snarky and quippy and do the rapport back and forth. So I didn't find that especially remarkable, frankly, because these didn't, as we were just talking about, feel quite accurate to the source material.
Yeah.
And I'm usually not a stickler for accuracy to source material in a sort of adaptation. But I think the problem is if you don't retain the Uncharted spirit, you just become what Uncharted was ripping off to begin with. and I think that's part of the problem of this movie. Yeah. The one major, my major issue with this movie, though, this is going to be this might be weird, so I want your take on this. So I don't think there's enough guns in the movie.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
There's one gunshot from Nathan Drake's hand.
Okay.
Because here's my thing. On a gameplay level, or to put on just a conceptual level, what separates, I think at its core, what separates Uncharted from Indiana Jones is the combat focus. Indiana Jones, we don't see him doing this sort of John Wick shit that we see Nathan Drake do.
You do him like a block punch and a right hook of a Nazi or something like that.
Yeah. But Indiana Jones, I always said that, not Indiana Jones, Uncharted. I always thought that the ideal Uncharted movie would be half Indiana Jones and half John Wick, because I think it's inescapable the fact that Uncharted is a third-person shooter, and we get the set pieces, we get in the ballpark of the character dynamics as we're talking about, but I think we miss a core pillar of systemically what's interesting about Uncharted, and what there was a great opportunity here to bring in really great people who are great at choreographing gun-based action sequences to do the shootouts in Uncharted that are so memorable, but that we never see from that cinematic angle, because we get the narrative and the character interactions in a cinematic presentation because Naughty Dog makes cinematic narrative third-person action games, but we don't get to see that third-person action outside of Drake's head.
It's actually interesting how little they even attempt to reference what the gameplay of Uncharted is, other than the puzzle solving, looking through a book. Oh, okay, you notice this pattern here, you can unlock the thing, push the key, then it comes in. But like the fact that we get Drake climbing for like maybe a total of 3 seconds of screen time in this film, and he shoots a gun once, and one of my favorite Easter eggs, even if it wasn't clearly intended as such, is when Drake boosts Chloe, which is something you do every 5 seconds in the games, and they mess it up. They're not quite good. I'm like,
I see what you're doing.
You got me there.
I see what you're doing, Ruben.
I don't even think
load
they
the next
did,
scene.
I don't even think they did those moments enough for me to feel like if they had like there should have been somewhere in this movie a action set piece where he is forced to hang from a ledge, shimmy, climb. Like, yeah, it's not fun in the game, but it looks cool, and it would look even better with a cinematic presentation and crumbling shit and all this stuff. But that's entirely missing. They don't even attempt that.
Yeah. Well, on the point of there not being enough rootin' tootin' shooty in this movie, I think if I can address it a little bit, because it did feel weird when he puts on the double harness or whatever, and he pulls out the gun and shoots those guys. I'm like, oh, we haven't really seen. I think this is the first time that we've seen him shoot somebody in this, and that's a very large part of the game, as you guys talked about. I think that it goes back to a casting issue, because I don't know if they want Hollywood's golden boy Tom Holland to be killing 36 people in this movie.
That's probably why they didn't lean into that angle.
I think it did feel weird, and like and there's even points, and this gets into like a plot hole issue, because I think there's a number of those in this movie as well, where like sometimes the villains will like have guns and be shooting at Nate and Sully, and then like 30 seconds later none of them will have guns, and they'll just be going at each other with like bats and batons and kicks and punches and stuff like that. I'm like, where'd all the guns go? Here a second. I think a good example of that is on the action set piece, the final action set piece of the ships flying through the air, suspended from helicopters. There's like one guy who has an assault rifle on the ship, and he gets kicked off. I don't know if he takes his gun with him, but there's just no guns for the rest of that scene. And I do want to talk about those big action set pieces, because I think Tucker's right. I think they are pretty fun, but yeah, like it just feels weird to have Tom Holland as Nathan Drake just like be a modern sort of action movie hero who's kicking and punching guys off of things. Like he kills people in those ways, but he doesn't shoot people. So yeah, whatever.
His sort of combat scenes are very Hobbs and Shaw. We're
Yeah.
fighting with the wrenches and things, right?
Hmm.
It's kind of clever, I guess. I mean, we sword fight in Uncharted 4 against Sam for like 90 seconds before the game ends, which always annoyed me. So like bring the swords back someplace. But
It's not
do you
against
not
Sam.
remember that?
No, you're
It's
doing
against Sam.
you're doing the sword fight in the burning boat against one of the
Sam.
villains. No, it's one of the villains.
But don't you then do, because Sam tries to take the treasure away from him?
I don't remember.
Another thing. But speaking of sword
Yeah.
fighting, I don't know where all those guys on the deck of the boat got swords from. Like they just materialized them out of nowhere.
Whatever. It
I have
doesn't
to
really
say,
matter.
I think
Yeah.
that so there's two major set pieces in the movie.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
There is the Uncharted 3 iconic set piece, probably the most iconic set piece of all of Uncharted, even though the sinking cruise ship in Uncharted 3 is better than the cargo plane. And I'll can hold me to that, go on record saying that. But I think that's pretty good. But I actually really love the I want to call them the Libertalia ships because that's basically what they are. But the pirate ships, when they fly the pirate ships out and they're fighting between them, that was an awesome idea. But I think the problem with this entire movie is that when I saw that, I'm like, I want to play that. Right?
Oh, well, yeah.
Because like at the end of the day, there's no need to adapt Uncharted, and I think that's even the best parts of the movie. I'm like, but I want to do this as Drake, as portrayed by Nolan North, as I am jumping between these two buildings, the power of the PS5 under me or something,
Yeah, and obviously, and hey, there's probably another Uncharted game in the works somewhere, not at Naughty Dog, but possibly, and they could draw inspiration from this, which would be fun enough. But I do think, yeah, you're right that the pirate ship sequence is the most creative aspect of the entire film, probably. I mean, it's not drawn anywhere from the games, and it is just, I mean, it's the Fast 9 sequence, but with ancient pirate ships, and it's awesome. It's fantastic. I actually genuinely wish it had not been in the trailers, because every time I saw the trailer, I'm like, that's gonna be fucking awesome. But now I know what happens. Like if I had just been sitting in the theater enjoying this, sunlight streaming down on two pirate ships in a cave, I'm like, that's an Uncharted ass moment right there. But then the two helicopters pick them up and they're jumping to, like, whoa, and I was still like, whoa, but I wasn't like, whoa,
I didn't watch the trailers.
Nice. Well, you
Also,
saved yourself there.
It's Rafe, by the way. The you're right, Tucker. The sword fight scene's Rafe. Damn it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The cargo plane thing, though, I thought it was pretty fun before when it's sort of contained in and around the cargo ship. But once we get into rubber Tom Holland flailing through the air and like bouncing off of boxes and then eventually being caught by Chloe, I'm like, okay, well you sort of lost me here, just because I'm like, the CGI doesn't really hold up there,
No.
and it's just very clearly rubber CGI Tom Holland flailing. But
it's kind of the only time in the movie when the CGI doesn't work. I think it's great in other sequences, but when you're right, like he gets his foot caught and he bounces off the box, like, oh, that is a rag doll. Like when he's jumping between the boxes, I don't know how else to word this other than the physics engine isn't right, and like it just is a little bit loose and a little bit weird. Like I don't know, like you have practical effects in certain areas, clearly it has to be CGI in others, but like the balance, especially in that sequence, which is so important, it doesn't quite feel right. And when he's being rubbery, I'm like, this really takes me out of it.
Yeah, but there's a few times in those action sequences where it does feel, a bit more brutal hand-to-hand stuff, when people are getting hit by giant crates out of the back of an airplane. Or one of my favorites is he fighting the Scotsman in
the bar?
No, not in the bar. That's a good one too. But I was talking about when that guy gets absolutely reduced to atoms, when he like kicks him off the ship and he gets hit by the side of the cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a nice, about as brutal as this film gets. apart from the bloodless Antonio Banderas throat slitting, who
Yeah.
we've not talked about, the villain of this, even though I guess Braddock becomes the villain before she gets crushed by a giant ship at
And
the
by
end.
by Braddock, you mean Nadine, because it could have just been Nadine, and it probably should have been Nadine. Of
Yeah.
course, they can't kill her, but at least why not make it somebody
Here's the
recognizable?
thing: I don't think Braddock is dead. They can very easily say she like swam under the water or whatever, but and got out of the way of the ship.
Here's the thing about the villains: they're
Okay,
not good. They're not interesting. I don't care.
right.
I'm
They
at
aren't
least glad.
Uncharted either.
I'm at least glad that they did not do the Uncharted 2 of Zarevich fucking weird Amazon blue nonsense horseshit Superman not natural twist. That was always something that irked me about those original games because the
Oh,
way,
when it's like Yetis or whatever at the end, or
Uncharted 1
zombies.
through 3 all have some sort of hypernatural twist at the end.
Hmm.
which I was never a fan of. Part of why I think 4 is my favorite. Um, but so I was glad we stayed away from that, but also does make them interesting villains.
Yeah.
Even the Scots, the I don't understand, the is funny at first, but then that guy's entire shtick is just being big and Scottish.
Yeah.
So it's like, but I do like the fight in the bar when Nate's. I really actually really like the idea of Nate being a bartender
Yeah.
and flipping and making the drinks. That kind of fits his sort of debonair personality.
I think what's funny about that is that they've made a sort of active decision to make Tom Holland's Nathan Drake an alcoholic. Because there's multiple points in the movie where and he doesn't look haggard or anything like that, but I can very much see this Nathan Drake in 20 years time or whatever, being he has like a beer gut and he's still trying to do the action stuff, and he's like taking a swig out of like a flask or whatever in the middle of fights. Because in the bar scene he gerbils some alcohol out of a bottle or whatever when it's got the little pouring tip on it, and when he's hiding with Sully at the end, he finds that 400-year-old bottle, and he's just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do it, and it obviously tastes terrible, but it's a fun little
Yeah, it's alcohol.
it's a it's a little bit that they do that I think is a weird decision to make Tom Holland's Nathan Drake an alcoholic, apparently.
So here's the thing, right? Because
Hmm.
I think that almost all of my issues of the film come down to it just not really feeling Uncharted in a lot of ways. But I still do think that Ruben Fleischer put forward a pretty fun adventure movie.
Yeah,
And that's
I think
why I
so.
think I ended up leaving the theater being pleasantly surprised because I thought it was just going to be a big swing and a miss on all fronts, right? I think we do get when we get that Uncharted theme playing for a second, we arrive on the Uncharted 1 tropical island, and we sort of play with the motifs a little bit, or we hear Sully call Nate kid, or we hear the oh crap as we wake up on the cargo thing. Like, I think we get enough Uncharted flavoring over what is a pretty fun finding clues, deciphering clues movie that I did have fun the entire way through. I do think this is nonetheless a solid movie, and actually that the idea of a sequel could be quite compelling.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. I think now that Nate and Sully have an established relationship, which is one of the best parts of Uncharted, is having an established relationship between characters who are doing ridiculous things together, but both of them love the fuck out of it. That's what you play Uncharted for the dynamic. And while I appeared to be in the minority here, where I think their dynamic was one of the strongest aspects of this film, Chloe especially, as I've said, I do think that I had a very good time with this movie.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of the better video game movies out there because it works as its own movie. It has enough flavor to make fans enjoy it from that angle, though doesn't have enough of that flavor where it feels like it's lacking for us in a little bit of a couple circumstances. But at the end of the day, it's a Tom Holland movie. It's a Mark Wahlberg movie. It's got some solid action. The CGI is good. It has a nice sense of adventure. It's gonna do well at the box office. I think regardless, it'll get a sequel, and I'm happy that we are starting high budget Sony produced movies. The reason I'm so happy with this movie, especially, is this was in production hell for like a decade. Could you imagine? This movie could have turned out terrible 6 ways from Sunday, but it didn't. They managed to patch it together, and you know what? Good on them for that.
Yeah. To give my final thoughts on it, Tucker, and I don't think I ever said that I didn't think the dynamic between Tom and Mark was good. I think it's fine, all things considered. I think they have about as many good hits as really bad misses, and everything else sort of falls between it falls in a middle range there that ranges from good to whatever. But yeah, I just don't think they have the Uncharted dynamic down. You know what I mean? And I think it is a casting issue. I think ultimately is what we have here is, they casted for the biggest possible names rather than who would be the characters the best. And
Yeah.
if I were to say off the top of my head, get like a
Like a Timothy
John.
Chalamet.
No, get like a John Hamm as Sully. I think he's older and he can still do a couple of these movies for 10 years, I get still. And Scott Eastwood or Zachary Levi as
Those are actually
Nathan
both great
Drake.
choices.
Yeah, Zachary. I think Zachary Levi would be great.
Yeah.
But too little, too late. We'll have to have perpetually 19-year-old Tom Holland as our Nathan Drake forever.
I
Yeah,
I guess the last thing I would just say is it is a fun movie, but
Yeah.
I think ultimately it's like Xbox needs these movies way more than PlayStation does because PlayStation just makes hyper cinematic games already. I'm pretty sure
Mhm.
it's John Cartwright who said on Twitter, like, this doesn't tell a better story than the games do.
Oh, of
And I
course
think
not.
he's totally right because how could you possibly out Uncharted because Uncharted just takes Indiana Jones and makes it playable
Yeah.
Mhm.
in super high fidelity. And like this isn't gonna do it. And
Yeah.
I was at literally the earliest possible showing in my area of Massachusetts. It was me, my roommate, and four other people. I
Yeah.
genuinely do not think that this has a very strong future at the box office.
Hmm.
And I just don't necessarily see. I get why you went for Uncharted as your first big adaptation, but like, I just think that it was an unnecessary one. And I think that even the strongest parts of the film are just trying to be like the game. So 2 hours, it's fun. It's a much better rental, I think, than a theatrical film.
Yeah,
Probably
I
you
would
can wait
say
on this one.
if you're interested in going to see it, go see it. But you certainly don't have to rush out to theaters, pay full price for this thing.
But it's definitely not the 44% on Rotten
No.
Tomatoes that it has.
Uh,
No, yeah.
just watch it on Stars, a streaming channel that everyone has that Sony partners with when it comes out on there.
Well, it's right. It's time to get excited. As you can tell from that PlayStation Studios opening thing, we're getting the Horizon Zero Dawn movie, the Ghost of
Mm.
Tsushima movie,
The
Well, we're
Astrobot
getting
movie,
we're
the
getting The
Astros
Last of
movie.
Us. Not
I-
this year. Apparently, they just said that it's not
Yeah.
coming out this
H-Bow.
year. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just the beginning, boys.
Yeah.
And I'll see you in the future. Did you have something to say, Abram?
I was just gonna say that postcard scene was good.
Yeah.
That's all I'm gonna say. I think that postcard scene we were getting closer, not only because we had the cigarette and the
Mhm.
revolver and everything, but I think a sequel, like I said before, could be good.
Was that a cigar in your hand, like Victor Goddamn Sullivan?
Ah, Monte Cristo, the thing I do in the games, Akatige.
All right.